Good day, JNUC attendees, and for those of you watching the recording later, I'm Sean Rabbit, and I'm a senior systems engineer focusing on identity for helping organizations succeed with Apple. This presentation is the culmination of a lot of work from the folks here at Jamf and the collective knowledge of the Jamf Nation community. So I wanted to say thank you for letting me be part of that. We only have 30 minutes today, so we'll be covering some prerequisites of what you need to know before deploying Jamf Connect, different configuration options for deployment, the install paths of going from being bound to AD to upgrading a user to Jamf Connect to deploying Zero Touch, and we'll be quickly touching on the ongoing maintenance of Jamf Connect. Let's begin. So earlier today during the keynote, we saw the new features of Jamf Connect 2.0. For us, the big changes are how the installer works, a new user interface at login, and with the menu bar app combined into the one app, we're now deprecating the configuration profile domains for those old apps. You now have two domains, com.jamf.connect.login and com.jamf.connect. Finally, we've removed the now unneeded browser plugins. We'll talk about end-user messaging later, but your user should be informed about changes coming to Jamf Connect login if you've deployed that to end-user machines. The login screen is dramatically different now, so avoid those help desk tickets with proper advanced messaging to users. Jamf Connect works with the native Okta authentication API and identity providers who have implemented the OpenID or OIDC spec. This is a list of our currently supported providers with a big asterisk on Google Identity. Google Identity has not implemented the Resource Owner Password Grant, or ROPG. This allows Jamf Connect to keep the local macOS password in sync with the ID provider. Thus, Google Identity passwords will not be kept in sync with local passwords. A question that has come up very often is a misconception with managed Apple IDs. Just as you can't log into your macOS device with your iCloud account, a managed Apple ID is not an identity provider for login. Apple School Manager and Apple Business Manager can sync with Microsoft Azure, however, to keep the Apple ID passwords in sync with your organization's identity passwords. I've put a link here for administrators to read about FileVault and macOS. In Catalina, FileVault is a full disk encryption handled before macOS even boots up at the EFI firmware level of an Apple device. By default, even though the beautifully designed login screen may appear to be an operating system login, this is actually pre-OS boot. macOS default behavior is to get the login token from FileVault, authenticate the user silently, and drop the user into Finder. You can read more about using FileVault, Jamf Connect, and macOS at this URL. Lastly, a note on obtaining Kerberos tickets. Jamf Connect augments and automates the native behavior of macOS to obtain Kerberos tickets. If your macOS device cannot communicate to the key distribution center with kinit commands and terminal, Jamf Connect will also be unable to obtain a Kerberos ticket. The Apple KBase article here in the URL can help administrators debug communications issues between client machines and the services required for Kerberos tickets. There's a great guide to how the Jamf Connect login and Jamf Connect menu bar agent apps work with ID providers. Okta works a little bit differently at the login screen, but for most providers, you see a two-step process of the user logging in with the ID provider to get an identity token. Now, what's happening on the first screen is a secure web view is loaded, and basically, we're sending out a URL request to the ID provider. It's just a web page, basically, and from that, we get back an access token, which then does some magic to get a response called an ID token. Now, decoded, this is an identity. The ID provider has validated this person as a real person, and we can identify them by name, and depending on the provider, the identity may return a role or group membership. Jamf Connect uses this only for identity, and we extract from the token the user's name, unique ID to create a short name for macOS, and roles or group membership to establish administrator or standard permissions for the Mac. At this point, locally, we don't know the user ID's provider's password. Now, depending on the ID provider, you may have a role where a user is only able to be assigned to one role, or you may be able to get a group membership or role where the user belongs to multiple roles. Alternatively, most ID providers let you set either group membership to a role or pass group membership as part of the token. Either way, you can set up Jamf Connect to read either a specific role or multiple roles, or use the group membership for assigning administrator rights to macOS. Then there's a second step where the user enters their local password. Remember, locally, we don't know the user's password yet. They've only identified themselves to the ID provider. You, as administrators, get to decide if this local password is local only and completely separate from the ID provider. Or, if you're using Google Identity, you don't get to make that decision. You have to have a password that's separate from the Google identity. But most administrators will configure Jamf Connect to do what's called a resource owner password grant, or basically, hey, ID provider, is this password correct? And, if out of sync with a local password, ask the user to sync them up. 2 logins, secure, and expected behavior. If you'd like to learn more, check out the security section of the Jamf Connect Administrator's Guide. Last prerequisite and planning note, network. If you're using an 802.1x radius certificate-based authentication on your network, and you're planning on using Jamf Connect login, you want to use your MDM to push a machine-based SCEP certificate, not a user-based certificate. It's like that old PSA on TV when I was a kid, how to get a job without experience and how to get experience without a job. If you're using a user-based certificate and you're on the login screen and you need a network connection to authenticate the user, see where I'm going here? No user, no network login. If we manage the machine with a system like Jamf Pro, we can trust the machine is in our control, and therefore you trust the machine to join our network. This is a larger conversation to have with your OPSEC teams, and it may not apply in our case of love and deployments in the time of COVID when nobody is on an organizational network anyway, at least here in the United States. So let's get into different configuration methods for Jamf Connect. You've got 2 pieces. The login screen, which could be used for just-in-time account creation or multi-factor authentication at the login screen. You've got the menu bar agent, which keeps the local user account password in sync with the ID provider. Now, you could deploy these 2 completely separately. If you already have users on machines, and all you care about is password sync and maybe a few bonus features like Kerberos Tickets and whatnot, you can just deploy the menu bar agent. Or if your goal is to create user accounts beyond the one you can do with enrollment customization in Catalina, you can just deploy the login screen. Or why not both? Why not MFA at login and then keep that user's local password in sync? Or, very common amongst one-to-one deployments, what happens if you have FileVault enabled? As we mentioned before, macOS Catalina and prior versions' default behavior is to decrypt the drive before the OS is booted, still in the EFI firmware. It then passes that login token to macOS, which verifies it against the local account, and, if everything's working like it should, skips the login screen and jumps right to Finder. Many admins will deploy only the menu bar agent because the user experiences one login screen. The password for the keychain and FileVault is kept in sync with the Jamf Connect menu bar agent. This is usually considered a good security stance because many OPSEC teams will know that if a bad actor has decrypted the FileVault drive, well, they decrypted the FileVault drive, and it's one target disk mode away from reading anything on that drive anyway. But wait, there's more. Maybe you just might want to also deploy login so you can add more users. Now, a perfect example here is maybe an admin could create an account with an admin rights just in time to do something to a user's machine, because it was easier than creating a Jamf Pro policy to do something one-off. Now, by the way, I would not do this scenario for lab environments unless you had some extra cleanup and FileVault secure token scripting trickery up your sleeve. Connect does not automatically grant a new user a secure token beyond the first user created. And lastly, what if your security posture required logging every login and MFA at the login screen? Well, we can do that too. FileVault will not automatically pass by the macOS login screen if we use the deny local preference key. So the user will be prompted for FileVault password, ID provider password, the MFA prompt, locally log in, and the password now stays in sync with the menu bar agent. Think of the Mac as bread, login as peanut butter, and the menu bar as jelly. You can have a delicious sandwich with only peanut butter, only jelly, or both. Use only the pieces that you need. So if you don't need Kerberos tickets, for example, keep the fried bananas out of the sandwich. One of the prerequisites of setting up Jamf Connect is an ID provider we discussed earlier in the presentation. And usually, at most organizations, the person who handles Azure isn't the person who manages the Macs. So if you gave the instructions in the admin guide to your ID provider administrator, they should be able to give you back the application ID needed for Connect. Because there's so many providers and we only have a little bit of time, I'll just advise you to RTFM, read the fantastic manual for instructions. Once you have the application ID, use the Jamf Connect configuration app made for you Mac admins out there. When you start, hit the New button and pick your ID provider. Presented will be the absolute minimum setting needed to make Jamf Connect work. Now from here, let's hit the test button in the upper right corner. Here you can test your ID provider setup and MFA settings. And most importantly, we can examine the OIDC identity token that's returned when a user signs in. We can see here that this Azure admin set up the application to let us know the user is a member of the role admin. And we can use that with Jamf Connect configuration to elevate the local user's permissions to that of an administrator. Configuration is a great debugging tool and has the added bonus of making configurations. New in configuration is the ability to see all of the preference keys and the raw configuration profile that you're creating in the GUI. When you mouse over a field in the config GUI, you can see the name of the key from the admin guide. And you can also see the raw keys inside a configuration too. Lastly, with a file save, you can export the settings to deploy to client machines as you desire, either as an apps and custom settings payload through an MDM, an upload of the mobile config directly to an MDM, signing a mobile config and deploying a PKG file, or manually installing whatever you wish. Another part of your planning is knowing, and knowing is half the battle, that Jamf Connect only uses local accounts. We'll talk about the actual way to do this in a moment, but it's important. If you're only deploying the menu bar agent because, well, I already have users deployed, they cannot be mobile accounts or AD-bound accounts. Let's get into the meat of installations. Chances are good that your Macs were bound. This could have made a network account or a mobile account tied to a Microsoft Active Directory on-premise server. We need to introduce a box full of butter to break up this lovely couple. What we do here is install the Jamf Connect installer as is, along with our config profiles we made with the Jamf Connect configuration app. The important key is for Jamf Connect login and demobilize users should be set to true. Now, this auth changer command will activate the demobilize feature, but it will keep the macOS login screen the same as what the user is used to. The demobilization will happen silently, and macOS will learn to love itself again. User accounts are now self-sufficient and will log in locally. Once we're sure all the users on the machine are demobilized, we'll run a command, authchanger-reset-Jamf Connect, to turn on Jamf Connect login. Please note that the auth changer commands are subject to change in the final release software. Please consult the documentation on the auth changer mechanism for details. Of note here on the screen, the extension attribute code. If you're using Jamf Pro, you can create a custom extension attribute to get a list of users on a machine which are still mobile accounts, or you'll get a result of no mobile accounts. This result can be used to create a smart computer group, which can be the target for the policy to run at reoccurring check-in once per computer, thus automating the full upgrade from demobilize to our next step, Jamf Connect login. And lastly, this entire process, including the extension attribute code, is posted at this URL. Important tip on demobilization. Do not unbind a machine when it still has mobile accounts. If the password for the mobile account gets out of sync, say it hasn't been talking to the domain controller for over 180 days, thanks COVID, and the machine is unbound first, you're going to have a bad time. And by bad time, that account may become corrupted. And by corrupted, I mean angry user, potential data loss, keychain out of sync, everything we want to avoid on a day-to-day basis, like COVID. Now, time for the human element of configuration. Before you apply any changes to a user's computer, especially large updates to login, don't scare them, just tell them. If your process up to this point has been binding Macs, you'll want to demobilize. But you'll want to explain to users why they're being asked to log out and log back in. Let them know what might happen when their local account is migrated to an account managed with Jamf Connect. Inform them of what this local password is. And inform them what the local password is when first installing Jamf Connect and why we're keeping the passwords in sync. And the most common source of confusion, inform users why they may need to type their passwords in twice. Administrators will know it's because of the secure method of using OIDC and ROPG. Users will probably just need to know it's for security. We're going to use the word upgrade here in two different ways. The first is for you admins who are already using Jamf Connect 1.x. Because of the large difference between the domain and the configurations for 2.0, I would recommend an uninstall of the 1.x components first. We've created an uninstaller which you can modify to suit your environment. The URL listed here will download an uninstaller PKG file. The script contains a single payload, a post-installer script, inside the PKG file. This package can be run entirely on its own, or you can open the package in Jamf Composer or Suspicious Package from Mother's Ruin software, extract the script, and modify it, deploy as you see fit. The script is designed to unload and remove the launch agents, reset the login window with an auth changer command back to the macOS standard, and remove the Jamf Connect menu bar application and login mechanism. You will also see some code to remove manually installed profiles with an identifier starting with com.jamf.connect. This code is optional as we use those manual profiles as part of our pre-configured evaluation of the Jamf Connect software. Your deployments will probably push config profiles or mobile config files via an MDM solution and APNS. So those profiles will not be affected by this script. You will want to remove those configuration profiles with your MDM solution. And again, this is a great starting point. Feel free to mod the script to suit your needs. As mentioned at the top of the presentation, the config profiles have different domains for their preferences. Login is still com.jamf.connect.login, but the config profiles for the menu bar agent have been simplified and consolidated. My best practice is to take the login mobile config or plist you already have and open it in Jamf Connect configuration. This will bring in all the essential pieces like the OIDC and ROPG application IDs from your ID provider, and then you can simply add the keys you'd like for the menu bar application like Kerberos Realm, file share mounting, actions, and so on. The second way that I'm using upgrade here is to upgrade the user's experience. And this is a simple method of pushing the config profile for login and the menu bar agent, validate that the profile is installed with a smart computer group, and then a policy that installs Jamf Connect installer package only to computers with a config profile for safety. Lastly, we can optionally log out the user to log back in and migrate that existing local account to be logged in with Jamf Connect login if you're using it for existing users. So if you're using Jamf Pro, that's a configuration profile, either uploaded directly as a mobile config file or as an application and custom settings payload with a plist, scope to the right computers, a smart computer group to make sure the profile is present, and lastly, push a policy to install the software with that group of computers as the target. Jamf Connect is MDM agnostic, so other MDMs will do this in a different way, but this gives you a good starting place. Now, totally optional, as if you've got FileVault enabled, chances are your user will never see the macOS login screen as we discussed earlier. To migrate the user experience, once Jamf Connect's installed, log out your user with the Jamf Connect login key for migrate users set to true, and their account will be converted to log in with your ID provider instead of just locally. And of course, log out, not reboot. You can use this launchctl command from a Jamf Pro policy. Oh, and my run the script display user and alert is up on my GitHub if anybody wants to save 3 minutes typing up a Jamf helper script. Now back to your users, be sure to document or explain what will happen to them on their next login. When a user is logged out, they'll be presented with a beautiful new login screen that uses the standard common credentials. They will log in with these ID provider credentials and then are prompted to type their password again to either create or migrate a user account. Again, this is that ROPG check. If their ID provider short name matches their existing short name on the computer, the migration is silent and the user will be simply logged in. If their existing short name provider doesn't match their ID provider short name, the user will be presented with a list of local account users to pick when the account is theirs, which one's theirs to be migrated. Now, in this case, we will respectfully create a new user account, and following the setup steps you define by your MDM, the account is created and the user will be presented to the finder. And of course, you may want to do just what we did here and video or screenshot this to get out to your users before they do this so they don't freak out and wonder what a gorgeous login demon just took over their shiny new Mac. Now that you've gotten this far, setting up for zero-touch enrollment is a breeze. Set up a pre-stage enrollment for Jamf Connect. In your account settings, select the option to create a local administrator account before the setup assistant and set the local user account type to skip account creation. This comes into play with FileVault secure tokens. The first administrator account that is authenticated gets the secure token. If your user being created is a standard account, you can then use the admin account created in that pre-stage at what is called an LAPS or lapse user. macOS will give the FileVault secure token to the admin account. Jamf Connect will change the password of that admin user to the FileVault recovery key, a good random unique password. Then, login will grant a secure token to the standard account created just in time, so they too can unlock FileVault. In macOS Catalina, the first user account who is an administrator account who is authenticated gets the secure token. So in that case, the lapse user is ignored and the user created by Jamf Connect will get the secure token and admin rights. And just like enabling FileVault through a config profile, if you wish for that key to be escrowed in your Jamf Pro server, issue a config profile to redirect the key to your server. In the link on the previous slide, you'll also see instructions for a PPPC profile to allow Jamf Connect to silently enable FileVault. And like all pre-stage enrollment config profiles, be sure to scope the profile to remain on the target device after the setup assistant is complete. The last consideration for Zero Touch is the enrollment package. You have two options. One is push the Jamf Connect installer with no changes. This will be able to enable Jamf Connect login, create a user, follow the remaining steps in Setup Assistant, and present the user to Finder. The second is to customize the installer package. The first link here will bring you to a Jamf Nation K-Base article on how to add custom branding, images, backgrounds, scripts to run, and how to activate the optional notify mechanism of Jamf Connect login. The second link will have a script I wrote as an example post-installer script for that package to customize your installation. Now, as of the recording of this video, I have not written an updated version for the 2.0 installer, but you can steal the important parts out of the 1.x version for your own scripts. Lastly, a note on user-approved MDM profiles and macOS. Some user-based profiles like certificates for accessing VPN or Wi-Fi require a user-based certificate, and the Apple MDM protocol requires the target computer have a user-approved MDM. There's a few ways to achieve this, but for the user to be MDM enabled, the zero-touch enrollment process requires that the MDM create the user with automated device enrollment. There are other ways to get user-approved MDM, like creating a network or mobile-bound account or a user-initiated enrollment, but that's outside the scope of this workflow. Any programmatically created users, including those created by Jamf Connect, are not considered an MDM-enabled user. For deployments that require these type of certificates, you can create your first user on macOS Catalina with an MDM that uses enrollment customization and a single sign-on payload. This can be locked to create the first user with the ID provider credentials. Because it's only the initial creation of the user that's locked, deploy Jamf Connect to keep the user's password in sync with the ID provider. And optionally, you can migrate the user to log in with Jamf Connect login after the initial creation, just like we described earlier in the presentation with the migrate users key. Another option is to use an alternative to user-based certificates. On machines deployed with more than one user, we cannot assure that the user assigned to the machine via MDM is the user who will be actually logged in. Instead, use Jamf Connect to obtain Kerberos tickets. Now, this is a larger conversation for the OPSEC teams, however, so plan accordingly. Lastly, for deploying Jamf Connect at scale is to keep Jamf Connect up to date. The simplest method is to use the Jamf Pro patch management policy to upload the new installer to target machines. If your policy is to run updates while a user may be sitting on the login screen, say overnight, this little chunk of code may help. I've included this in my GitHub as linked earlier in this presentation, but basically we check to see if the currently logged in user at the GUI is either _MB setup user or root. If either of those is true, then we're sitting at the login screen. Issuing a kill all-9 login window command will kill the login screen and reload it to the new version. So that was a lot of information in a short time. If you have more questions outside of the Q&A for this session, join us in the virtual trade show here at JNUC. I'll be in the booth later, and of course, feel free to reach out on the Jamf Connect Mac Admin Slack channel and by contacting your Jamf sales team to schedule a call with an engineer. Many thanks to Team Caribou here at Jamf, Mike Vandelinder, Matthew Ward, Matt Benio, Paul Rinkus, Richard, Tyler, Toby, and Nate, and of course, my last-minute line producer, Andrew, and thank you very much for watching.